Hi, I'm William Pitch, and you're listening to UC3P.
Welcome to the University of Chicago Public Policy Podcasts. My name is Siddhant Wadera, and I am the production manager for The Main Page, our podcast on policy, politics, and current affairs. Today we have a special election-related episode. Jack Emery moderated a diverse panel of University of Chicago students to gauge their post-election night reactions. Just a few notes before we begin. This episode was recorded remotely due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. We held this panel on Wednesday, November 4th at 9 a.m. before any major calls in the presidential race or multiple Senate races. Finally, this episode was made in partnership with the Project on Political Reform. PPR is a student organization at the Harris School of Public Policy that investigates the sources of political and institutional dysfunction and identifies pragmatic solutions. The mission of PPR is to prepare students to reform policy that contributes to strengthening governance by addressing such breakdowns. Without further ado, here are our student panelists.
As of right now, Joe Biden has secured 227 Electoral College votes, while Donald Trump has secured 213 Electoral College votes. The states that have not yet been called by nearly all media outlets are Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Georgia. At this point, it is clear that both candidates have clear paths to 270. It seems clear that the House will remain in Democratic control, while the Senate is a toss-up with key races yet to be called in North Carolina, Michigan, Maine, and Georgia. Today, we are joined by 6 University of Chicago student voters. When asked to place themselves on a scale from 0 to 10, with 0 being extremely liberal and 10 being extremely conservative, our students considered themselves 0, 0, 2, 4, 7, and 8. Students in this group voted for Joe Biden, Donald Trump, and Joe Jorgensen this year, and Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, and Gary Johnson in 2016. These students come from the undergraduate college, the Harris School of Public Policy, the Booth School of Business, and the University of Chicago Law School. Our panel contains 3 men and 3 women. Races represented are African American, Caucasian, and Latino. Sexual orientations of our panelists include heterosexual, homosexual, and bisexual. With that, I would like to turn it over to the panelists and start with an introduction of yourself to as little or great of an extent as you want, and tell us how you're feeling about today and what your main takeaway is from last night, starting with Alexandra.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. So my name is Alexandra Green. I'm a 2L at the law school. And as far as last night, I don't know how to feel. There's not a lot of surprise, fortunately or unfortunately. And now I'm just kind of waiting on tenterhooks to see how everything's going to resolve.
Awesome. Will?
Hi, I'm Will. I voted for Joe Jorgensen, and I feel like last night was a shame in the fact that they didn't start counting mail-in ballots earlier. I think the delay and the gap will be very detrimental to public safety and security.
All right, Rachel.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm Rachel. I'm a second-year MPP student at the Harris School here. Regarding mail-in ballots, it was kind of interesting to see, but I think that as someone who has worked a lot these last few weeks and sort of making models with friends and studying potential outcomes of elections, one thing that I was pretty impressed by was seeing that 538 and sort of wonkier modelers, I thought, in my opinion, pretty accurately managed to explain sort of the impact of mail-in voting versus that of these initial runs that we were seeing, which I thought was, at least in my eyes, a success of polling, although I know that probably throughout this podcast, polling is going to take a lot of flack.
Tate?
Yeah, I'm Tate, first-year Booth student from Dallas, Texas. I guess my initial reaction as of this morning is fairly pleased with the overall results. Definitely coming from a conservative perspective. I think Trump did a lot better than expected, which I think will result in the Senate most likely staying Republican. I know that's not 100% sure, but based off my assumptions, I'm looking at a Biden win, Republican-held Senate, which for a lot of people who didn't like Trump, who have conservative ties, probably the best case scenario. So yeah, overall, fairly pleased by how the night went.
Andrea?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Andrea. I'm a second-year student at Booth, and I'm originally from Puerto Rico. I've been in Chicago 5 years, so this is my second presidential election in my lifetime. I'm feeling, I'm not quite, I feel pretty numb. I'm not quite sure how to feel at this time, whether hopeful or not, because again, I'm very concerned coming from a liberal perspective, but then also trying to keep in mind, like there's so much to count, particularly from mail-in ballots. So I'm trying to be patient and level-headed and trust I'm also a 538, believer. So I'm trying to trust in the data that has been so thoroughly gathered from different standpoints.
And Jay?
I'm Jay. I'm a Master's of Public Policy student here at UChicago. I guess my takeaway from last night, I really have no idea who's going to win the election at this point, but I think it'll probably get more antagonizing as things go on. And sort of in the medium perspective, I don't think a whole lot is going to get done out of the outcome of this election, no matter how it goes.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here. We are going to start now with a series of individual questions based on information that you all provided to us prior to coming on the panel. So we're going to start with Alexandra. You stated that your greatest hope if Democrats win the election is that neither Biden nor Kamala will seek a second term and that a true socialist party can form and take some significant action before 2024. Help us understand why you were inspired by that vision.
Yeah, so in 2016, I voted for Hillary Clinton, and had I been able to vote in 2012, I would have voted for Barack Obama. However, my experiences between 2012 and 2016, and definitely the last 4 years, have kind of pushed me even further left than I was to begin with. And while I appreciate the third-party candidates who consistently, build a platform and build their coalition, however small it is, I continue to be frustrated by the DNC in particular using promises of more progressive policies or promises made particularly to voters of color and then not delivering on them or not being as fierce in their advocacy once congressional seats are filled and once the presidential vote comes out. I am very excited by the prospect of Kamala Harris. She and I actually graduated from the same undergraduate institution, but she is not the progressive that I wanted from the slate of Democratic primary candidates. I personally would have preferred Julian Castro. And so I don't expect either of them to kindly step back, but I would like to see what kind of grassroots organizing is going to happen in terms of building a robust third party, in terms of building a legitimate progressive option for people who feel similarly. And I'm looking forward to getting started on that work once we finally know what the outcome is.
Excellent. Will, you are the lone panelist, as you mentioned, to have voted for Jo Jorgensen. Can you tell us how you came to that decision?
Well, first of all, I'm voting from Illinois, so that really wasn't that contested of a state. It's been solidly Democratic. I knew it would turn Democratic. So for me, it wasn't that difficult of a decision. I really couldn't vote for Donald Trump, even though I was inclined to vote on some of his economic performance. So I really couldn't vote for Biden either, for his policies, for the ways in which he would increase spending, for the ways in which he would advance a social agenda, which I really didn't like. So I think that I almost had to vote for a third-party candidate if I was going to vote at all, because I just couldn't vote for either Biden or Donald Trump.
As a follow-up to that, have you put much thought to what your vote would have been had you been voting in a more contested state?
I think I probably would have voted for Biden, but again, I would have been incredibly reluctant to have done that.
And now to Rachel. Earlier, you told us that your biggest concern about a Trump presidency is the erosion of democratic reforms that are nearly impossible to reestablish. Can you tell us a little more about the specific reforms that you're concerned about?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that there's there's a number of different things I could talk about right now. I think one that particularly I think that we're going to see in the next couple of days is that while our elections are not obviously are not indicative of the popular vote, something that will be interesting to see is that the likelihood of a Trump win at this point in time, as we're having this conversation, is pretty much hinging on whether or not this goes to the courts, which to me is a pretty fundamentally undemocratic way of deciding an election. And I think that this is a kind of a microcosm of other Trump victories that have sort of been decided in fairly undemocratic ways. It seems pretty problematic for a democracy.
Okay, and now Tate, you said your biggest concern about a Biden presidency is the Supreme Court packing by Democrats. If the Democrats end up in a position where they have the ability to do this, do you think that they should choose to leave the court as is? And if so, why?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. You definitely get the perspective on the left to move to packing the court, especially with the rush of ACB. But yeah, I think it's just like the future precedent. Or every time do we have like a, Senate controlled Republican Party and president, are we then going to pack it other way? And then are we looking 50 years down the road and we see a 100-person Supreme Court, like something completely absurd like that? I think is just where that could go. And I don't love that. I don't know. The system's worked for the past 150 years. So I just keep the status quo. I don't know. I'm more worried about what would happen if he did it. If it was like a one-time, if he said I was going to add 1 seat, 2 seats, and then be finalized, and then there would be no movement from there on in the future, I think I'd be somewhat okay if that was the overall outlook. I just think the president going forward would be rough to deal with. It'd almost be like every election year you're voting on the Supreme Court.
So Andrea, it seems like topics surrounding Puerto Rico have a significant influence on your political views. Can you be specific about what you hope a Biden victory means for Puerto Rico?
Yeah, I mean, I think Puerto Ricans for the entirety of the time that we've been part of the United States have been treated as second-class citizens. And I think the treatment that we received from the most recent administration after Hurricane Maria and the wording and just obvious lack of support was just offensive as a human. I think it would be offensive, not even if we were American citizens, just to anyone. And so not only that, I think historically Puerto Rico has had a controversial, somewhat fraught relationship with the United States. And I think the most basic thing that we have not received this decency and the fact that we don't even have the right to vote for people that are legislating our laws, that we were imposed with a fiscal control board that have significant power on the island, I think is absurd and, to be frank, not democratic at all. So those issues matter a lot to me, and I'm hoping a Biden presidency will take a deeper, significant viewpoint on Puerto Rican issues that they have struggled with for so long, particularly the significant debt that we're in as a result of several relationships that we have with the U.S., such as the Jones Act, I think would be important to me. And I think that as a result, again, from Maria and so many Puerto Ricans being forced to move to the U.S., now that we represent as a significant voter bloc, I'm hoping that the future administrations, particularly the Biden administration, will take more importance of the issues that we care about.
Excellent. And then finally, Jay, you voted for Gary Johnson in 2016 and Joe Biden this year. Tell us about your thought process about voting for a major party candidate this year compared to the last cycle. And at what point in time did you make up your mind about who to vote for?
Well, I vote in West Virginia, so sort of like Will was saying, it's not a very contested state. So I don't, in 2016, I felt pretty comfortable voting for a third party candidate, knowing the state would go for Trump either way. It's